Hi, I'm Dr. Richard Resurrection. I thought that I would spend a few minutes talking to you about how to put together a professional report. This has been a real concern of mine over 40 years of my career as a professor, that many students have difficulty in making a professional presentation. They often come up to me and say, "Help, professor, I don't know how to make a professional presentation." And for whatever reason, some people don't understand the need to make your work look like it's a product in business or government. When you're in college, you just think, well, I'll just type my name anywhere on a page and go from there. So what I'd like to do today is to give you examples, take you through the basic process of putting together a relatively small paper with citations and so forth, so that you will be able to do this properly in my class, Leadership Studies 101, but also you will take it into your other classes, and in those classes you will try to find out what kind of requirements does the professor of this class have. And based on many of the things that I'm telling you in presenting papers for Leadership Studies 101, you'll be able to make adjustments to fit that professor's requirements. Now, I know the common statement I hear is, I don't know anything about APA, I did MLA in high school. And probably that's the most common thing that I hear. I did MLA in high school, I don't know APA. Well, if you have the basics of MLA, you will have no trouble completing work that's based on the American Psychological Association Form and Style Manual. Now, let me go back and tell you a little bit about why I'm so sensitive to this. I often will see students, go in to make a job presentation or something for an internship interview, and they don't have a professional mentality about their presentation. When I was in college as an undergraduate, I think I must have been a junior or senior, I had a wonderful professor by the name of Paul Zoll. And Dr. Zoll had studied literature at Harvard and came to California mainly to do his research at the Huntington Library. And so he taught at Cal State University of Los Angeles, and he taught in two areas. One was literature, which was his field, but he also taught technical report writing, and he had worked many years in the aerospace industry as a technical writer. And so he knew how engineers and other technical people wrote. It was in his classes that I learned how to do a formal technical report and how to begin thinking like people who have to read those reports. So my reports tend to be more on the technical side, or the technical report or business writing side. That was one of my greatest influences. My second one would have been probably about the same time in college, when I was hired as a student worker, student assistant, and I was doing technical illustrations. I was making overhead transparencies, making ink drawings for various types of publications and so forth. And over the years, I would occasionally do illustrations for publications. And even when I did my graduate work at the University of Maryland, from time to time, a professor might ask me to do an illustration for an article. And those were the days before you had CAD and so forth that could do so much better drawings. But I was a technical illustrator, so I was able to help them. But it taught me, number one, from Dr. Zoll's technical report writing class, and then my work as a technical illustrator, that there is a requirement in industry and government to have professionally prepared reports. I took that then into my university education, and I began to see why quality has to be put into a term report. I'll give you an example of this. In my leadership studies class, I taught the class how to prepare a report. One of the students toward the end of the class came up to me and he said, just before class was to start at 1 o'clock, he says, "Dr. Rez, I got to tell you something. You won't believe this, but the other day a professor was collecting term reports, and he was walking down the aisle and the students were turning their reports in. He saw me turn my report in and he stopped and he said, 'Let me have that report.' And he grabbed that student's report and he looked at it, and it had a cover page and the citations were really nicely done. He says, turned to the class and he said, 'Now, this is a university report. This is how I expect them to be presented.'" Because all of us who have been through graduate school, especially those of us who have done master's theses and doctoral dissertations, we know what's expected in the presentation of professional reports. So the objective I have for you is that after I make this presentation today, you will be able to present your report in a professional manner, the kind of work that we would expect in a university. So what I would like to do now is to show you a little bit about some of the requirements. Now, actually, somewhere I have an even earlier version, but this is a 1974 version of the American Psychological Association Style Manual. And I remember in those days it was a little bit difficult to follow at first, but by 1978 it had become like this. So you'll notice that the thickness is starting to increase. Well, 1994, I believe, it came out like that. And so it got thicker and thicker and thicker, and I don't know what today's is like. It must be a lot thicker. I don't have as much of a need to have the main manual as I did in those days. Now, there are guidelines the APA has prepared to help you. One of them is this book called Mastering APA Style. And if I was a major in psychology today, I would, if I was a student like those watching this, I would try to buy this manual and master it, because they expect in the industry, that is the publishers, and your professors expect in the behavioral sciences that you follow this manual, or there are some other ones similar to American Psychological Association. For my classes, I highly recommend this publication. It's called The Concise Rules of APA Style. Now, I got my business card taped to this so that it doesn't get stolen, but you can get kind of the top and bottom of this here. But this is a very good manual. If you've got the basics down, you just thumb through and they'll have examples of how to put reports together, including references, citations, tables, figures, and language style and so forth. So this is a manual you may want to seriously consider getting. If you're not in a major such as psychology or communications, I believe some political science professors require APA form and style, College of Educational Studies and so forth. If you're not in those departments, maybe you don't want to have to spend all the money to get this, but if you are, you want to give serious consideration to purchasing this manual. Okay? Now, what I'd like to do is to begin by starting with just a sheet of paper. When you do a master's thesis or doctoral dissertation or a senior thesis in some schools, you're required to use standardized paper. And that paper is usually, I think, 20% or more cotton. It will often have a blue line around it to show you the borders or the margins. And what I would like to do now is take you to the board and go through that point by point with you. Let's begin the report by showing you a page, the page size and the margins, and where you number the pages. You can buy papers, I think I mentioned earlier, it's made of about 20% cotton, and you can have it pre-printed with a very light blue line. Now the reason they use a light blue line is because when you copy it, the light blue doesn't photocopy, or it shouldn't. Sometimes it does. But it sets the margins up, and the margins are from here to here, 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch over here, and 1 inch over here. So you have to keep all of your typing inside that. So everything you write will appear like this. It'll go through like this. Another paragraph starts, goes through like that, staying inside the light blue line, or you don't have a light blue line, it's still a 1 inch margin all the way around, and we're following that. Now I do notice that the thesis, I looked at some doctoral dissertations in the Chapman University Library, and some numbered the pages. You would find a page number here. So let's say this is page 1, was here. And some, they allowed the page number to be placed right here, just slightly below the blue line. Either way will be acceptable for us. I think that won't present too much problems. But for our term papers, this is fine. Like this. This will come out looking pretty nice. So this standard 8.5 by 11 page, stay within the 1 inch margin. Justify to the left. You do not have to justify to the right. Just justify the left, indent each paragraph. Okay? So this should make pretty good sense to you now how to lay this out. Now what we want to do is we want to move to the cover page, certificate of original work. Then we're going to get into the body of a report. I'm going to show you how we do that. I'm going to get into headings and then citations and references. But all our typing will stay in here, with the exception, we would permit page numbers here. If that, you can put them here or you can put them above there. Either way will be acceptable to us. I would like to talk to you now about the cover page. The cover page, like all pages, has to fit inside that 1 inch margin. There are various cover pages, and I'm not only going to show you the requirements for Leadership Studies 101, I want to show you examples of other cover pages so that when you go to another class of a professor says, well, I don't want to use that style, I got a different style. Or if you go on for your master's degree, let's say at another institution, you would be able to follow their style. But the considerations are basically the same. Well, if I say you need to have a title on the cover page, well, how do they want that title laid out? So I'm going to show you some various types of titles. Let's begin. Here's, even when you look at a book always has a cover, but a book will often have a title page. There's an example of a title page. This is from the book Resilience at Work by Sal Almaty and Debbie Kashaba. But here's another book. You'll notice the book has a title page. Now, they're done differently. Every one of them is laid out differently. You have to just recognize that. Different publishers use different title pages. Different universities use different title pages. Different professors use different title pages. But most have some kind of a title page. So what I did was I went to the university library and I looked at some doctoral dissertations that have been done in recent years, and I took the format and modified it for a term paper. So it's pretty consistent with the way the thesis librarian of Chapman University is requiring a title page to be laid out. But I'll show you some others that are done by other universities. And usually what happens is that cover page for a document that must be submitted to the library is approved by the graduate faculty. So usually in a university where where they have doctoral programs, they will have what's called a graduate faculty. And the graduate faculty or the graduate council, together with the dean of graduate studies, will decide along with the librarian what the title page will be like. They will also decide on other subtle rule changes to various style manuals. Now, within a university, many style manuals could be used. So you might find one department using University of Chicago style manual, another one using Modern Language Association, another one using American Psychological Association, another one using the American Sociological Association. There are many, many style manuals. Even in California, for example, for law cases, the California Supreme Court decided how they want their work presented. So they'll have a cover page and it'll all be set up, and everything goes into a California Superior Court or higher has to be presented in that manner. So let's just take a look at various types here, and then I'll take them apart. I'll go through just a few samples with you here. This is an interesting one. This is my son's thesis that he did for his bachelor's degree, and he did his degree in architecture, so theirs is much more like you might see with an art type program. So his thesis was titled Architectural Transformations in Las Vegas, and so he had graphics here of Las Vegas and his name was down here. So it's done very differently. It's more aesthetically pleasing than the more stale type that we use typically for a thesis for graduate students or even undergraduate students. Here's another one done for Cal State University Long Beach. And Cal State Long Beach, I think Cal State LA, probably a lot of the CSU systems theirs all tend to look sort of like this. They get laid out like this. What are some of the things that I'd like you to pay attention to? Now, in this one here, you'll notice there's a title up here. It'll talk about it's a thesis presented to the faculty of a particular department. Then in partial fulfillment of the requirements, in this case for a Master of Arts degree, and then it's done by so-and-so, and it will list his degree and the date that he submitted it. Now, this example has all the considerations we have for the title page for our class. It's just organized a little bit differently. So I want to take you through some of the basics first, and then go through them in somewhat detail so that you will have no trouble understanding your title page. This one here is a title page of a term paper when I used to teach at Cal State Long Beach. And I want you to notice that it has a title here. The employer's legal responsibility for maintaining an intimidation-free work environment. This was a class in the identification of management competencies, and so students were writing about the problem of the hostile work environment that is sometimes created by managers who make serious mistakes in how they manage their people. Now, what I would like you to see, this is the title. And you'll notice that the title at Cal State Long Beach is in all caps. And we use what we call the inverted pyramid. By the inverted pyramid, I mean that the title is long here. If it goes to a second line, it inverts. The second line is shorter. If it has a third line, the third line will be even shorter. Okay, so this is called the inverted pyramid. Here's another example of a thesis. And as I go through these, I may tell you a little bit about the students, because it's not just their their writing is tied to their careers. This is one done by a registered physical therapist who did her master's degree, and I was her supervisor, the supervisor of her thesis. And I'll give you the title of her study. An experiment to determine the effectiveness of a cardiovascular risk education program for managers. So there's her title. And you'll notice that in her title, it's so long that it inverts. All right, all caps, second line, a little shorter than the first line, third line even shorter than that. And so it had to be a title that was more encompassing enough to summarize what was in all of this. So you might say, well, the title's got to be kind of the shortest summary of what's here. So it has to give enough of a clue of what's inside here. So when we write a title, we don't want to write long titles if we can avoid it, but sometimes we can't avoid it. In this case, she wanted you to know that she had done it as an experiment. And so she put an experiment. Sometimes people would leave that off and just say the effectiveness of our cardiovascular risk education program for managers. That could also be a title. But she really wanted to emphasize that it was done experimentally with a control group and an experimental group. So in that case, she put an experiment. That was critical to her study. Who was it for, what was conducted, and so forth. Does the title give us enough information? So it can't be some cardiovascular risk management. That would not have done it. It would have been too empty a title. But this then title fits her career. As you'll notice, she's a physical therapist, and she worked in the field of cardiovascular rehabilitation. And so she picked a title that fit her career. Here's another one. You'll see this was a professor in the United States Army ROTC program at Long Beach State, and he worked under my supervision, and he was very interested in leadership assessment centers. And leadership assessment centers have been used, since the mid-1950s, when they were developed at the American Telephone and Telegraph Company by their industrial organizational psychologists. But a great amount of work was done at West Point. And you'll notice, so he wanted us to find out what was going on in leadership assessment centers in the United States Army. So he wrote Assessment Centers and the United States Army Reserve Officer Training Corps. So he was looking at the assessment centers that are used in ROTC. This fit his career. He was an Army officer. He wanted to do something that related to his career. Now, let's go back and let's take this one about the intimidation-free work environment. You notice the title here, okay? All right, let's go. The next part is that it is a report presented to, and in this case, we put the name of the professor. Normally it would be a department, but if it was a thesis, but in this case, he presented to me as the professor. So presented to Richard Resurrection, EDD, professor, California State University of Long Beach. Somewhere on the page, you'll see that, presented to, that it's a report presented to. And then at the very bottom, so let's look at, that's the whole report. Now I've gone through the title, a report presented to in partial fulfillment. So here we see in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the course, OCST 485, Identification of Management Competencies. Completed by Janice E. Sherman, and she put here, she's, since this is a term report, her highest degree at the time was an Associate of Arts, 1972, Southwestern College. She submitted the report in November of 1991. So what we have here, all the things that are on this page, in most universities, you'll see they will be presented on the cover page in some form, okay, in some form. Now, what I'd like to do is to show you how we're going to do it for our class, how our class will make the presentation using the same information, just organizing it like our librarian and our graduate faculty have determined a thesis would be presented or a doctoral dissertation. So I'm using a final product of the term paper to be presented in the same manner. Now I want to caution you. Some professors do not use the presentation this way. They go very strictly by the American Psychological Association Style Manual, and they're really strict to the point that they do the layout a little bit differently than I'm presenting. I'm presenting as a finished product. They're presenting as the type of style that might be presented to a journal as a preliminary draft of a report. Okay, so let's turn now and let me look at our syllabus. So if you turn to, I think it's Appendix B in your syllabus, in subsequent semesters it might be a different placement in your syllabus. But here's the format we're using for our class. And I'm going to point out to you how all the things that I've already explained, like I used at Cal State Long Beach, are basically in here in a little bit different order. And I'm going to explain to you about the vertical layout, so forth. All right, let's take a look here. Title. This was the title of a paper from way back when. But it's an example. And you'll notice it's all in caps, and it says Edmund K. Stanley, a model citizen of the greatest generation. Okay? And then it says a term report by Frank N. Stein. And I have to laugh at this. I got that from my technical report writing class with Dr. Zoll. He used to use Frank N. Stein as one of our managers that we always wrote to. But Frank N. Stein, as I put it here as a sample or report, wouldn't you know that one semester a student never changed the name and turned her report in with Frank N. Stein as the author of the report. But you'll notice here, Chapman University, Orange, California Leadership Studies Program, submitted in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the course LEAD 101, Introduction to Leadership Studies, Principles and Practices. You see, it's just like the other example I showed you, just laid out a little bit differently. Course instructor, in this case it has my name, but you will use the name of the instructor to whom you're submitting your report. Okay, so it might be Kevin Brame, it might be Mike Macy, it could be any number, it could be me too in certain cases. And then October, this one says October 2011, we're a long ways from October 2011 now, but you will put the date that you would submit your report, okay? All right, so I think when we grade this, here's where we often see the problems. Students, right away, if they get a long title, they often will forget to use an inverted pyramid. The other thing is the vertical layout of the page tends to be sometimes crammed way up here, nothing, big white space here, or big white space at the top. You got to get a good vertical layout of this paper. Now, on here you see a page number. That's only because there's a page in the syllabus. There is no page number. This is not page 1 of your report. Let me repeat that again. This is not page 1 of your report. All right? It's just the title page. All right. So I want to emphasize then, title pages are important. Maybe not all professors use them, but at some point in your career, you will go into industry and government, and you will use them. Your company will have a standard for that. All right, now I'd like to turn to the certificate or original work. Originality in your work is just basic in universities. In my career, I've had to be involved in cases where where I've seen sad cases where people have plagiarized work and then the consequences have been severe. And interestingly enough, I even had a case where I was the chair of a committee where a professor had published an article and had plagiarized major sections of the article and was caught. It's not pleasant. It's not only just plain not right, but you have to give credit to those who did work previously from which you drew some information. You also have to show that your work is original work, and when pieces of it are not original, you've got to give recognition to the source. Now, sometimes something becomes original because you took a piece of one person and a piece of another person's work and a piece of another person's work and a piece of another person's work, and you put them together for a new idea. But you still have to cite all those sources. So what we're saying here is that this is your original work. Okay? So it says here, I or we, sometimes we allow students to work in groups on a paper, hereby certify that this paper constitutes my or our own product. And that is critical. When you sign this, you're stating that this is your work. Now, interestingly enough, I've had cases where students work in a team and one person did no work. The other one did all the work. And then the one's claiming that, well, wait a second, I should get a better grade. I did all the work, and he didn't do anything, or she didn't do anything. Well, what you're saying here is that you shared equally in this work, and you're both taking responsibility for it. That makes sense to you? I hope that does. So this is what we call the certificate of original work. So it will go right behind the cover page. So here's the cover page. The next page will be the certificate of original work. The cover page is not numbered, and the certificate of original work is not numbered. They're not page 1 and 2. Okay? The main body of the report is where you will start. What I'd like to do now is to get into the report. And I'm going to kind of start at the back of the report first, because I want to show how the citations and references work hand in hand in the body of the report. Let's take a look here. I made a fictitious title of a book. This book is titled Your First Job Interview, How to Make a Positive Impression. Okay, so that'll be the book title. The book is written by Mary Sue Jones. The publisher is Success Publishers. They're located in Long Beach, California, and the year of the publication is 2012, and it's copyrighted. Now, again, this is fictitious, but it'll work for what we want it to do. Okay? Now, how do I take this information and enter it into the references section of the report? At the back of the report, you will type in center. This is a center line. Center line. Those of us who've done architectural and drafting know that this is a symbol for a center line. Now, you will not put this in your report, but I want you to see that it's in the center of the page. So, if, for example, this is the page, this is the 8.5 by 11 page, this term reference will be written in right there in the center. Okay, so it'd be centered there. Now, APA says, do not make this bold. Not bold. Some librarians want this bolded. So you say, why don't you people get together? Why don't they have one standard? Well, whoever they are, they're just different standards done by different people. But APA says do not bold this. So you use, now watch carefully. This is an uppercase letter right there. And then these are lowercase letters all the way through. All right, uppercase, uppercase, case, and all the rest here is lowercase. And then we're very sensitive to that. Watch, when do we make things bold, when do we make things capital, and so forth. Now, let's take this, move this into the reference at the back. Now, you may have, perhaps when you're in high school or when you're in 8th grade, they would have called this bibliography. This is not a bibliography, it's a reference. But there they would have called it bibliography. We just used the references that we used for the report. We didn't have an exhaustive bibliography. Now I want to go through this step by step with you. This is the base. These are the basics. If you know these basics, you could pretty well go through the APA style manual and pick out, depending on what you have, whether it's a journal or a book with multiple authors, or it's an electronically retrieved source, you can pretty well follow the guidelines. Now, follow carefully what I say. We start with the author's last name, Jones, capital, lowercase. All right, capital, lowercase, comma. Her first name is Mary, so we put M period, S period. We do not use first and middle names. Now, why don't we do that? If you look at MLA, I believe they use first and middle names, or first name and middle initial. I'm not positive on this, but let me tell you the story I heard. That many, many, many years ago, the American Psychological Association decided that because there was significant discrimination against women in publishing, we would not put first and middle names, because that tends to give away whether it's a male or a female with the full name. Obviously, Mary Sue is that's pretty much a woman's name, although there was a song called Mary Sue at one time, and I forgot who the singer was, but he was all about a man named Mary Sue. Well, there aren't many Mary Sues, all right, that are men. All right, then we do parentheses, the date of publication. So we had here, published over here, put that in there. Close parentheses, period. Space, then we put, now this is this is the title now. This is capitalized. Okay? Capital Y, then lowercase, 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 space, lowercase, everything lowercase. The title is all lowercase, except for the first initial, unless we hit a proper title, like a person's name or a city or something like that. So everything's lowercase. We hit a colon here, right? Right after a colon, we go back to a capital. Oh, that went dead. I'll do this in black now. Okay. We hit a capital right there. And then we go back to lowercase. How H, everything lowercase. To make a positive impression, period. All this lowercase. All right, everybody with me? I'm going to go back over this again because a lot of people miss this, and this is not the way it is in most style manuals. But APA does it. This is a capital. All the rest of the letters are lowercase. Colon. Following a colon, you go back to a capital and then lowercase again. The exception is if anywhere in here you have a proper title, like the name of a person, the name of a city, the name of an organization, and so forth, you would capitalize the first letter of those terms. Now, it used to be we would underline the title of a book. But that's before we had word processors like we do today. Word processors are common. So now what we do is we take all of this and we place it in italics. Okay, all of this, the title of the book. That's one of the things you got to be real careful of with APA. When you look at the style manual, be sure you're noting what is capitalized, what is not capitalized, and what gets put in italics. As in here, what did we put in italics is really, really important. Okay? If you look at old sources, they'll be underlined. I'll probably have some examples maybe for you of that. All right, now the city of publication. So we just keep following. If I'd have had more room over here, I'd have kept going with this. But the city of publication is Long Beach, comma, and we use the 2-letter designations for the states, like California CA, Missouri MO, Mississippi I think is MI, Maryland is MD. You would put that. Now, in some cases, you do not need to put this if it's like the city of New York. There's only one New York. But why do we have to have a CA, California, after Long Beach? Because there are many Long Beaches. There's a Long Beach, New York, I think, or New Jersey. There's a Long Beach, Washington. I'm thinking there's one in Texas. Okay, so Pasadena is another example. There are more than one Pasadenas in America. So now we need to have the state. Then we put colon and the name of the publisher, period. Please, when you look at APA, note when do they use a period and when do they not use a period at the end of a reference. Because sometimes they don't use a period. All right, let's go back through this again. Last name, capitalize the first letter, comma, use only the first initial and middle initial if you're given the middle initial period. Date of publication, parentheses, period. In italics, the title of the book, first word, the first letter of the first word capitalized, everything else is lowercase, unless we come to a colon, and then we go uppercase here, and then back to lowercase again, period. All of that is in italics. In the old days, as I said, it would have been underlined. Okay? Now, if you have a proper title, name of a person, city, organization, so forth, of course, the first letter of that would be capitalized. All right. And then city of publication and the publisher. Those are the basics. If you understand that part of it, then you go to your style manual, and if it's a different kind of source, it's a magazine or it's a professional journal or it's a book with multiple authors, then you'll know what to do. Now, one more thing I want to point out. You will notice that this second line, third line, even if you had a fourth line, these are going to all be indented. All right? Be sure to do that. Indent the second line. If you got an old APA manual, they did it the reverse. This was indented, this wasn't. But the current manual says this stands here, this will be up against the 1-inch margin. So that would be, you'd come into here, this would be your 1-inch margin right in there. Okay, and you'd start Jones right there, second line, third line, like that. It would look like that. Okay? All right, I hope this makes sense to you. You know, you'd say, well, God, why are you so picky about this? I review articles from time to time for a couple professional journals. And I'll tell you, you can't believe how many people cannot follow the rules. For example, APA says they want the date here, name, date. Many style manuals, I shouldn't say most, but most style manuals have the date of publication down in here somewhere. There's a reason it is put here, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. Okay, there's a reason it is put here. So I'm jurying an article a few years ago, a wonderfully written article. And I knew it was done by medical school professors. It had to have been done by them because they were talking about firefighters' exposure to the byproducts of a fire. And they were looking at those firefighters who would wear breathing apparatus, not breathing apparatus, filters afterwards. So the fire's out, they put filters, masks on. Some would not put their masks on. They compared the chemical makeup in the blood between those who wore masks and those who did not wear masks. And they found that those who did not wear masks had a lot of chemicals in their blood. And I don't remember the carcinogenic agents and some of the things like that. I can't remember the exact chemicals that they were able to identify. But they didn't follow APA, and the editor of the journal specifically said in his instructions that you had to follow APA. So you're not publishing this until they get it straightened out. So my recommendation was a great article, really well done. Turned out it was done at an Ivy League medical school. But for some reason, no one was familiar with APA. So my instructions to them were publish it as is, however, they need to go get it edited for APA. And I will explain why this organization is so important. So let's go to that right now. All right, I want to look at the use of when you cite multiple authors for a given source. So I'm going to show you the references and then relate them to the numbers and relate them to citations and hope that it makes sense to you. All right, here's, like for example, here's a book. This is a book was Resilience at Work, and then a colon, no matter what life throws at you. Written by Sal Maddie and his wife, Deborah Koshaba. And here's how let's go back to the basic rules again. As you'll notice, last name Maddie, comma, first initial, S period, R period, no first name or middle name. Ampersand for and, Koshaba, comma, D, no first name, period, no middle name, just the initial period, date of publication period, and so forth. Then the citation would continue. This is the way it would be in the back, in the references, all right? So this should be, actually, I should have this as a references, okay? When you cite in the body of the report, and it comes up the first time, you will mention both authors, Maddie, and now you write and out, Koshaba, date of publication 2005. You go on here, and now if you took a direct quote, okay, you put the direct quote in here, it ends here, and you do not put a period there. You put the page number in parentheses, and the period goes right there. Okay, so the period on the outside here, the quotation marks, will be right in here. Okay, all right. Now let's take a case with more than two authors and the citation. You notice that we cited both of these people here. More than two authors. Here's an example. I had the opportunity to work with Sal Maddie and some other people on an article that dealt with Hardy Attitudes. Sal Maddie is the creator of the Hardy Attitudes survey. He did this. He graduated from Harvard University in psychology, went on to the University of Chicago, and did a 12-year study where they did, as a result, one of the products of that was the Hardiness Survey. And so we used the Hardiness Survey in a study over 4 years. We collected data on academy recruits in the Long Beach Fire Department. and we wanted to see what would happen. What kind of people graduated from the academy? And we basically found that those who have hearty attitudes tend to graduate, and those who do not have hearty attitudes tend not to graduate from the academy. Very simply put. Now I want to give you some background on the people. You know who Sal Mattei is. I told you he graduated from Harvard with his PhD in psychology, in cognitive psychology, taught many years at the University of Chicago, then was recruited to the University of California, Irvine. He's considered one of the world's renowned psychologists. Rick Harvey was a doctoral student of Sal Mattei's at the University of California, Irvine. At the time we wrote the article, Rick was just defending his dissertation at that time. So he came on to help us. His research was on the hardiness survey instrument, and not only that, he could work the computers. So he was great on statistics. Then I came up as a third author, and you'll notice these are not in alphabetical order. Mattei would not be the first one up here if you had alphabetical order, then Harvey, then me. Then you'll notice Giatris, Chris Giatris, is a retired firefighter. He is a clinical social worker, and did his master's degree studying the hardiness, using the hardiness instrument to study the hardy attitudes of firefighters. And so you got Chris here as the fourth author, and then Steve Raganold, who was a fire battalion chief with the Long Beach Fire Department. He participated in writing the article also. But you'll notice that they're not in alphabetical order. If we put them in alphabetical order, Giatris would come first, then Harvey, then Mattei, then Raganold, and I would be last. How do they get out of order and why? Mattei was the senior writer. He was the senior researcher on this case. He was assisted by Harvey. So these two really led the research. Then we took the other three, figured out what we did, and so you put them in priority order of those who made the greatest contributions to the research. Sal Mattei did the greatest contribution, and Richard Harvey did the next. The rest of us were kind of equal, although, I mean, I played a role because I had a major piece of that work working as a human resource consultant at the Long Beach Fire Department. So you put them in priority order. Whenever you see them out of alphabetical order, that's usually the case. It's by who made the greatest contribution to the research. Now, if you cite these people, you would cite Mattei, Harvey, just like this. Watch this. Mattei, Harvey, Resurrection, Giatris, A&D, Raganold. Okay? Just like up here. Now, you will notice that if this is the first time we cited it, you need to be sure the date is here. In our case, I think it was 2007. Okay? If it is not the first time you cite it, if you cited it already, you wouldn't have to put the date there. All right, the first time, there should be the date here, like we did there. The second time would not necessarily have to be. Now, I notice that some students say that their professors require them to cite the dates every time. When I was at Cal State Long Beach, we had a university-approved thesis typist, and she showed me an APA. If you cite it once, the date, you don't need to cite it again. So going by her recommendation, second time we wouldn't need to cite it. Now, if you have 3 or more authors, the next time you make a citation, then you can use this. Mattei et al. Use a period after all. It's an abbreviation, a Latin abbreviation. Take the quotation, page, period here. This stands for and others. If you're using another format, another form and styles, some of them will say, would have said Maddie and others. They changed it to the English. Maddie and others stated, so forth. So again, if it's two authors, you keep naming both names each time. If it's three or more, you can name them all once the first time. After that, you'll name them once and then put et al. I notice I review articles and I see people who cite for the first time and put et al., and that is technically not correct. That's not correct. All right, let's go back and let's look at some of the citations now in some reports, and that'll kind of get us pretty much into how to put the report together. All right, what I'd like to do is walk you through a report, show you how to cite, tie things to the references. I'd like to tell you a little bit about how to make a table and how you cite a table, or how you reference a table. So we go back, this was the report I showed you earlier. This is an old one from Cal State Long Beach. The employer's legal responsibility for maintaining an intimidation-free work environment. Now, as you'll notice, here's a report. Now, at Cal State Long Beach, we did numbering differently. We did the page 1 number here, and then subsequent pages were in the upper right-hand corner. At Chapman, we put them all in the bottom like this, like here. Now, let's go through this very carefully. As we look at this report, she says that the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, is calling for, now notice there's quotation mark, 3 dots. That means she took this quotation out of the middle of a sentence. So there was some writing before that, and it tells the reader that the writer's telling the reader, I pulled this out of the middle of a sentence. So, calls for sweeping anti-discrimination legislation and a law saying workers can be laid off only for just cause, not at the whim of bosses. And once again, now notice end of quotation, parentheses, small p, period. The page is A1, close parentheses, period. So that's a short quotation. All right. Now, you will notice that she has another quotation here that's longer. Anytime your quotation is 40 words or greater, 40 words or greater, then you have to indent the quotation, remove the quotation marks. Now, APA, if you looked it up in this manual, they would tell you go to a double spacing. However, most editors and many university librarians instead single spaces. So I prefer it single space. You indent, single space now indicates that your direct quotation is 40 words or more. So she says, according to Black, parentheses, 1983, close parentheses, comma, intimidation means, colon. That means the author is Black, is named Black, and it was published in 1983. Now she's going to define the term. So you'll notice here, indented, single spaced. Now watch the difference here. The period is here. Period. Then parentheses, small p, period 422, that's page 422, close parentheses, no period. It's different for a long quotation. Let me go over that again. 40 words or more, indent. I recommend you single space. You may double space if you wish, but many librarians prefer the single spacing. Many editors of journals will go to a single space on a direct quotation that's 40 words or more. Notice that the period ends the sentence, then parentheses, period, parentheses, p, small p, period, meaning page, 422, close parentheses, period. No period. No period here. No period there. Period is there. Okay? So indent, single space. Let's go through the report again and see if we find any more. Here again, she's now stating that Harris. Now, Harris, she did a personal interview with Harris. So let's go back here. Liz Harris, comma, Director of Personnel Services at Rancho Santiago Community College. Notice that she goes in parentheses. Personal communications, comma, April 1991, close parentheses. Under APA, personal communication, a lecture, if there's no publication, then you do not place it in the references, that source in the references. You cite it just in the body like she did. So what we know is that she talked with Liz Harris probably by an interview or telephone call. All right? Now let's follow this. So that's all we're going to have for a citation. So she comes down here and goes on so far, and then she says, Harris stated 40 words or more. So now look at this. Direct quote, single space, indented, no page number because it was an interview, right? And you'll notice here, now we come down here, she's got another citation. It's 40 words more. Now I want to show you something interesting. You'll notice she puts parentheses, N, period, P, period, close parentheses. That means there was no page number on that publication. So it probably was a flyer or something, you know, like a front page, back page, or no page number. Okay, let's go through here. She's got another quotation in here. You'll notice that Simmons, 1962, noted, and she's got a direct quote and the page number. This is just under 40 words, so it is double-spaced, direct quoted, much like you do the traditional way you cite. Now I want to take you all the way to the end here and show you. Again, this is a different setup in the back here than we're following. This is the old APA style. All right, but I want to make sure that it's clear to you what we're doing and why the date has to be placed the way it is. And if we go back here in page 1 of this report, it says, according to Black, 1983. Now, what I'm looking for right here is Black, 1983. I have to go to the back, and in the back I'll find, now in this case, this report only has 3 references. But in some reports, you may have theses, you may have 20, 30, 40 references. The authors are placed in alphabetical order. So now, all I got to do is look for Black here, look for Black here, then I come over here and I look for the date 1983. Black, 1983, I got it. That's where it came from. It came from Black's Law Dictionary. So that tells you the source. Now, if I was to look, it's the same with every one of these other ones. These are all publications. You'll notice the date is up here because with the date, with the name and the date, I can now trace it. The old way this would have been done would have been to cite down below here, actually within the 1-inch margin. We would cite at the bottom of the page, and this got to be so hectic for typists. And you had to flip to the back of a report, or you had to flip to the end of a section or the end of a chapter to find the resources. So you would find it here, and then you'd flip to the back of the report, and the typists had the problem of sometimes citations were maybe as much as a quarter of the page. When APA and some others went to the more what we call the journalistic style, like we would do for a journal, they went to, that's why the date got moved up to here, so that we can just quickly find it in the back of the report. Just keep your thumb on the back of the report, you can flip back and forth and find your resources. Now there are fields that say we'd rather have it at the bottom of the page so the reader can pick it up right like that. Okay? All right. I'd like to add one more thing now. I want to show you how to lay out a table. If you look in here, in this manual, there's really 2 ways to lay a table out. And I've picked the way that many librarians picked, although there's another way to do it. The simplest way is staying again in the 1-inch margins. Okay, you put table number, in this case, table number 1, period. Now in this case, this would have been an example of how, if you were studying Nelson Mandela's Hearty Attitudes. So we give it a title that's appropriate. Nelson Mandela's Hearty Attitudes. So we know this is about his Hearty Attitudes. All right, the 3 Hearty Attitudes are commitment, control, challenge. So we got the Hearty Attitudes here, and we want representative examples. So now we know that going down this column will be examples of these. So we go from commitment has 3 examples. Control, 3 examples. Challenge, 3 examples. All right, so you write table here, upper lowercase, period, Nelson Mandela's Hearty Attitudes, put a line across here, type Hearty Attitudes, representative examples, and a line across here. And that's it. Don't be very careful, because some of the programs on the mini computers, or the mini computers is what we find in the word processors is boxes. We do not use boxes. We don't put boxes around here. It's just these 2 lines, that's it. All right? And now, where do reports go? Reports, where do tables go? Tables should go on the page immediately following where they are mentioned. Now I'm going to take you through a report and show you a table, but it's got some mistakes. So let's go through this report. I'm going to pick up the mistakes. In this report, the author used headings. So here is an introduction. Here's a heading, introduction, another heading, definitions of terms, another heading, discussion, another heading should have been conclusion. The person didn't put conclusion here. So that's a problem, okay? So you got introduction, definition of terms, discussion. There should have been a paragraph with conclusion. So in the old rule of technical writing is introduction is tell them what you're going to tell them, discussion is tell them, and conclusion tell them what you told them. That's a real simple rule. If we use a side heading, like here, okay, this is center heading. These are right in the center of the page. Okay. Then if we want to divide that further, we would go to a side heading, like this. That means this is a subset of that. Okay, and we come over to here. So now let me go back and show you what we did. Mike Macy gave a lecture and he talked about the warrior philosophy. And we were analyzing the St. Crispin Day speech of King Henry V in William Shakespeare. So there are several things now to talk to you about in this citation. To stay with the headings first, Mike Macy said a leader must have the mindset of a warrior, a leader must have the intellectual dedication of a scholar, a leader must have the critical thinking skills of a philosopher, a leader must have the heart of a servant. So Mike gave these out, and he actually sent them to me via an email. And so it was not a retrievable source. So we put it in here and we put down personal email. You'll notice in parentheses here, personal email communication by Michael Macy to Richard Resurrection, October 30th, 2014, close parentheses, period. Now we know it's a personal thing that you can't locate it anywhere, all right, other than to talk to me about the personal communication or Mike Macy. So what he did now is he wants to define these terms: warrior, scholar, philosopher, servant. So he says definition of terms. Then he says, the following terms are defined to clarify their meaning in the context of this study. These definitions were formulated based on Macy's lecture in Lead 101 at Chapman University on November the 10th, 2014. So now what he does is his terms are warrior, scholar, philosopher, servant. And you can see now how he broke that down. And he used those as subsets. Now, why do we use headings? Why do we use introduction, definition of terms, discussion, conclusion? They're kind of like freeway signs. You can be driving down the freeway and it might say Lakewood Boulevard, 3 miles. Well, you know, if you're in the fast lane, in the HOV lane, and it's got 4 lanes on that side of the freeway, you may want to, in 3 miles, Lakewood Boulevard is going to come up. If you want to get off at Lakewood Boulevard, it tells you start edging over. It gives you a mindset. Now, we could remove those signs on the freeway. Lakewood Boulevard would stay there. So there are some people, and if these are like road signs, if it says introduction, definition, and terms, as soon as you see definition and terms, you know, oh, the writer is going to define some terms for me. Okay, now, if it hits discussion, then you know, oh, okay, we're going to now get into the discussion. There's kind of a rule about technical writing. I should be able to remove all those headings and the report should still flow. They're just helpful to the reader, much like freeway signs are. So they become clues to the reader. Okay? All right, let's see if I can find a couple other things here that might be appropriate for you. So some of these definitions here, there was one definition here that the author took out of our textbook. And I want to show you that because the use of our textbook, it's a book with multiple authors. And I want to tell you the mistake that many students make. All right, let's take the textbook. Where did oh, here it is. This is our textbook, Leadership Development Studies. It has two editors, Monica Bird and Susan Edwards. So if we take a look, and if you look at your syllabus, you can find, excuse me, if we reference the entire book, if we take this whole book, if I want to say to you, if I made the comment in a publication that this is an excellent book as a resource for a leadership studies class, and I am referring to the entire book in one shot, then I would put Bird, comma, M, period, S, period, and Edwards, period, S, period, parentheses, EDS for editors, because I'd find that in how to do an edited book in APA guideline, and so forth. Okay, so in your syllabus, at least for this semester, that's page 3 and the top of page 4. It carries over. All right, I want to stress this again. If I'm referencing the entire book, however, if I am referencing a specific section of this book, and there is an author of an article in that book, then I have to do it differently. All right? I'm going to pull away from that report for a minute to give an example of how you cite something inside a book. There's somebody who wrote a chapter inside a book. Here's an example. This book, Education and Training for Work, and it says here, Volume 1. There were 2 volumes to this. So this is Volume 1. There was another volume just like it. A group of professors, colleagues of mine, got together and wrote this book, edited by Clifton P. Campbell, who was at that time a professor at the University of Tennessee. And so every chapter in here has a different author. If we were referring to the entire book, we would cite Cliff Campbell as the editor. But if we're not, if we're going after a specific chapter in there, for example, I wrote a chapter, let me show you how it reads. It's Resurrection R, parentheses, 1996, Coaching and Counseling, period. That's the title of the chapter. In C period, P period, Campbell, parentheses, ED, period, close parentheses, comma, and then it goes, Education and Training for Work, colon, Delivering Instruction, comma, volume 2, parentheses, there's 2 P's, meaning that it's multiple pages, 2001 to 2015, close parentheses, period, Lancaster, comma, PA for Pennsylvania, and it's colon, Technomics is the publisher. So what it says then is that we're not looking at the whole book. Now let me tell you how serious this is. I'll never forget this, the summer of 1978, I was teaching a class, an educational foundations class. And a student wrote a term paper for me. And she quoted John Dewey. And I said, I like that quote. I know I'd read that before when I was doing my graduate work. I liked it because as I recall back, it was something developed during the time of the development of the Spires School at Columbia University Teachers College. And I wanted to go get it, so I looked at her citation. I couldn't find it. You know what she did? It was Dewey was published inside an edited book. She cited the author of the whole book, not the chapter. I wanted Dewey for the chapter. And I thought, maybe she just made this up because it sounded like something I'd like to hear. Can you believe this? About 30 years later, I'm reading something. I think I was on my treadmill just reading away. And I'm reading this thing, and I'm reading John Dewey, and I go, oh, there it is. 30 years later, I find it. I don't want to wait 30 years to find your quotations. So I had gone to the library, couldn't find it. It drove me nuts. You do these citations so they can be easily found. Now let's take this book then. You'll notice Plato, 2014. Now Plato was not born in 2014. He wasn't alive in 2014. But this publication was done in 2014. So it says, Plato, 2014, defined a philosopher as a lover of wisdom. That was a direct quote. Page 6. So now, what I do is I come here and I go to page 6. Okay, I can find page 6. Here we go. Page 4, 5. There it is, page 6. If I go to page 6, this is a piece from Plato's Republic. It says here that Plato was the author. This book was published in 2014. Now we can find it. Now I don't have here's the reference. Person did the references correctly. Plato, 2014, extracted from the Republic, and goes on and so forth. But this is the correct way to do it. Likewise, there's another citation in here where there's a quotation by Henry V, and it's Shakespeare, and it comes out of this book. So he cites Shakespeare. And when we come back to the references, there's Shakespeare 2014 and gives the references on the complete references here. Now, let's continue through this. This is a pretty decent job for a technical style of writing. I wouldn't consider it creative writing, but for technical writing, it's pretty good. Here's a table. And the table's laid out nicely. Took an example of warrior, scholar, philosopher. Those were the guiding principles by Mike Macy. And then over here on the right-hand side, you'll notice the direct quotes that came out of here. Okay? And actually, these should have had page numbers by them. Every one of those should have had page numbers. Okay? Oops, page. All right. Now, and the periods should have been moved out. Okay, that's correct. All right. Let's take a look. This reference here should not have been done in bold. Not bold. Okay. All right. Now, one final mistake on here. As I take a look at it, I see nowhere in here where the table is referenced. When you have a table like this table is to help the reader it can be done to introduce something, it can be done to point out specific points, it can be pointed out to provide an overview, it can be used for a number of reasons. But the table must work with the writing, and it has to be referenced in the writing. So as I read through this, is it referenced in the writing? It's not. Somewhere in here it should have said table 1. If the writer would have said table 1 here on this page, the next page would have been table 1, would have been the table. Very next page. If the author mentions the table here, the next page would be table. Always immediately following. Okay? So let's go back and tell you what I've talked about in here. I tried to show you the use of headings in this report. And this report also doesn't have page numbers. There should be page numbers on this, which are missing. Okay. I showed you about the table. Table 1, period, the title. Things completely cited. This is nicely laid out, very nicely laid out. Terms are nice. The terms were on another page that is torn off, but were nicely cited in here. Overall, this is not a bad technical report paper. So, I've tried to show you some examples now of how to put the report together to give you guidelines. It's very important you stick to this and you look things up. All right? All right, what I'd like to do as the last exercise here, very quickly go through some typical statements that you might find in a report, and I'm going to show you how to make corrections on those, and that will be, I think we will have given you the basics of how to write a report. All right, I'd like to do a quick exercise to point out some common mistakes that are made in reports that I grade for my classes. And so I'm going to read this statement and I'll show you the corrections we would make. It says 45 program graduates received surveys. However, only 7 graduates returned the surveys on or before the deadline date. Thus, the researcher immediately sent reminders to those being surveyed. So the statement's not bad, but let me point out a couple mistakes. First, 45 program graduates. Whenever you begin a sentence with a number, it must be spelled out. So that would have been F-O-R-T 5, F-I-V-E. You spell it out, 45. If it's the beginning of a sentence, okay? Now, here's a basic rule. It's not followed by all people, but here's a basic rule. 1 to 9 are written out. 10, 2 digits, on up, we use the digits. All right, so let's continue to look through the sentence. 45 graduates received surveys, however, only 7. So we should have spelled 7 out. S-E-V-E-N. Okay? Unless it's a table, if this refers to a number in a table, you do it whatever way it's put in the table, and usually it's with digits in a table. Okay? All right, let's take a look at another one. Sonia Carson in the movie Gifted Hands, the Ben Carson story, Angel, Carter and Carter, 2009, consistently demonstrated the hearty attitudes of commitment, control, and challenge as defined by Maddie and Kushaba, 2005, in their book Resilience at Work, How to Succeed No Matter What Life Throws at You. She didn't give up on her vision of successful futures for her 2 sons. All right, now let me point out the mistakes. The sentences aren't too bad, but right after the colon, okay, colon there, then the T has to be capitalized. So following a colon, capitalize the T. Okay, so that reads again. Consistently demonstrated the hearty attitudes of commitment, control, and challenge as defined by Maddie and Kashaba, 2005, in their book, Resilience at Work. Here's a colon and a capital H, so it's done correctly. Now it comes down to here, she didn't. Should not use contractions for formal writing. So here, this should be, she did not. Do not use contractions with formal writing. Okay, unless it's a direct quote. Okay, number 3 here. One respondent wrote in the open-ended comments section of the questionnaire that he/she believed the customer services personnel haven't been very helpful. This is a statement by the writer, so this should have been have not been very helpful. Specifically, she stated, now here's a direct quote. It's a direct quote from a survey. Every time I've called the customer service department, they've. You leave it as a contraction because it is the direct statement of somebody else. It's a direct quote. The person obviously bolded things up in that response. So it said, they've given the big runaround. Last month I had to make several calls before I finally got to someone who could help me. That's the end of the quotation. So you leave it as the person. If the person misspells it, you leave it that way. There's a way you can indicate that. Likewise, 8 respondents, that should be spelled out. It's below 10, E-I-G-H-T. 8 respondents commented on their high degree of frustration with the customer services department's personnel. Now, I've only shown you a few of the errors, but these are very common ones that I see every semester. And you know, for my 40-some years of teaching in the university, I see them and I correct them and correct them and correct them. I hope we don't have to correct those in this class. Okay, let's summarize what we've done. I wanted to spend a little time with you today to help you through the development of a professional report. It doesn't take a lot to make a report professional, but you have to pay attention to a lot of details. I know many people think, well, why do we have to do all these citations? Why do we have to do this? Why do we have to do that? I'd like to tell you 2 examples of why you have to do that. Back in the 1980s, for about an 8-year period, I would go in the summers to Oklahoma State University to participate with teams of people to write textbooks. And they tell us every time we meet, the editor says, you must, whenever you have used somebody else's information, give me the information in writing that you're going to you want to use a particular resource from someone else. You want to quote them, you want to use a table they've developed or whatever. Tell me. Put it on this form, give me the form. So we come back, I hear this year after year after year. Well, one year we come back and that same editor gets up, and I'll never forget, it was Gene Carlson was his name. He says, guys, we have been sued. We turn out this book. It was the first time we used multiple colors and expensive printing. And I got a call one day a few weeks ago, and the person calling me says, hey, I really like that book you just published. Oh yeah, we do too. We like the colors, we like this, we like that. We think the revisions are great, it's going to sell well, and so forth. Now this is a multi-million-dollar publishing house. He says, guys, I'm going to tell you something. Somebody forgot to tell me that this table came from a source. That source called me and told me that he was going to lay a lawsuit on us for violation of copyright. It turns out that this man over many years had empirically developed this information in this table, and it was his, it was published as his, and we took it and published it, and we never even cited him. Not only did we not get permission from him, we didn't cite him. Now, thank goodness we were able to reach a very expensive settlement with him. And we had to publish retractions, we had to redo the publishing, the printing of the book. It was terrible. He said, don't ever do that again. Following year I go back, and that publishing company publishes a basic textbook that is used in community colleges across this country. And he says the regents of Oklahoma State University filed a lawsuit against an industrial organizational psychologist firm for taking copies out of one of our books to use as reports that were distributed to various fire department agencies. Now, I want to remind you, this is not they didn't put it in a book. They were in reports that were sold to agencies. The regents of the Oklahoma State University sued that firm. These are expensive lawsuits. It's not only illegal not to cite properly, it is the wrong thing to be doing. You need to give credit to the authors. There are guidelines on what you may copy. In educational settings, they're a little bit easier with us. But if you go out for profit, you cannot copy material. And you must cite your sources. The other thing I try to emphasize today is how do you present it so it looks like a professional piece of work? Nice cover page, proper margins, good typing, good layout, following the rules of how to make a table and so forth. These are critical to making a good professional report. Remember the story I told you? Where the professor was walking down the center aisle of the classroom collecting the papers and spotted a report one of the students from Lead 101 had done. And he saw the cover page and he took the report and he went through it real quickly, and then he showed the class and he said, "This is a professional report." That's how you should do your work. It's not just for Chapman University, it's for your career, to do good professional work. And then maybe you won't have to say, "Hey, professor, I don't know how to do a professional presentation of a report." I hope this has helped you. And if you have any questions during the course, I'm always available to help you through them, trying to figure out what's in this little handbook, the concise rules of the APA. I'll do the best I can to help you with that so you will present a professional report. Good luck with your paper.